They never teach you this in school. They don't put it in the self-help books that sell by the millions. And the people who smile at you every day will never say it out loud. Because the moment you truly understand what I'm about to tell you, a lot of the quiet pain you've been carrying for years finally starts to make sense. You've walked into a room before and felt the temperature drop. Not dramatically, not in a way you could easily explain, just enough. Conversations pause half a second too long. Smiles arrive a beat late. Someone suddenly needs to check their phone the second you start speaking. The energy shifts in a way that feels almost physical. You leave that room, replaying every word, every glance, every micro-expression, asking the same exhausted question: what did I do wrong this time? You didn't do anything wrong. What you felt was real. The shift was real. The quiet distance was real. That subtle chill in the air was completely real. But it had almost nothing to do with your behavior in that moment, and almost everything to do with who you are becoming. Carl Jung spent decades studying this exact pattern. He described it as one of the oldest, most consistent, and least discussed dynamics in all of human psychology. Once you see it clearly, something fundamental shifts inside you. Not because the coldness suddenly stops, not because people magically become kinder, but because you finally stop blaming yourself for something that was never about you in the first place. Stay with me. What you're about to hear has been buried under layers of social performance, comfortable lies, and collective distraction. Once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Every single person alive is carrying two versions of themselves. The first is the version they show the world. Put together, reasonable, pleasant. The version that laughs at the right jokes, posts the right photos on Sunday, says the right things in meetings, and works very hard to make sure nobody looks too closely. Jung called this the persona, the Latin word for the mask that ancient actors wore on stage so the audience would know which character they were playing. Think about the coworker who always seems confident, always has the polished answer ready, always looks composed. Or the old friend from high school who posts the perfect family photos every week, the beautiful house, the smiling children, the grateful caption. That is the persona, the carefully constructed face built for public life. Then there is everything else. Jung called it the shadow. The shadow is the part of a person that didn't make the cut. It's the anger that was buried because expressing it once felt dangerous. It's the envy that was never admitted because admitting it felt shameful. It's the quiet, private fear of looking in the mirror one day and realizing you never became who you were supposed to be. It's the sensitivity that was mocked, the ambition that was discouraged, the voice that was trained to stay small so everyone else could stay comfortable. Here's something most people get wrong. The shadow is not evil. It is not some dark monster hiding inside you. It is simply everything a person pushed aside in order to keep their mask looking clean and acceptable. The man who was told that boys don't cry buried his sensitivity. The woman who was only praised for being agreeable buried her real opinions. The teenager who was laughed at for dreaming too big buried his ambition. Year after year, layer after layer, the shadow grows in silence. And here is what Jung understood that almost no one talks about openly. The shadow never disappears. You can ignore it. You can suppress it. You can pile 20 or 30 years of persona on top of it and walk through life pretending it isn't there. but it stays, waiting. And the moment something in the outside world brushes up against what someone has been hiding from themselves, the system reacts, defensively, quietly, and sometimes with something that feels very much like hatred or resentment. This is where it becomes personal. That coworker who has been colder toward you lately. That old friend who grew distant the moment your life started improving. That family member who suddenly has a sharp comment ready every time you talk about your goals or your boundaries. They are not reacting to you. They are reacting to what your presence is waking up inside them. There is a specific reason why your growing awareness, your calm, your simple act of becoming more yourself makes certain people deeply uncomfortable. And it has a name. Imagine someone has spent years carefully managing how the world sees them. Every morning they put the mask on. They perform confidence even when they feel hollow. They perform generosity while quietly keeping score. They smile at the office, laugh in the group chat, show up to the gathering, and say all the right things. And for a while it works, because almost everyone around them is doing the exact same thing. There is a silent agreement in place. I won't look too closely at you if you don't look too closely at me. Then someone walks in who simply sees. Not someone who announces it. Not someone who calls people out publicly or lectures. Just someone whose eyes are quietly open. Someone whose calm doesn't shift when the social performance starts. Someone who isn't chasing approval, isn't impressed by the theater, and isn't playing along with the comfortable fictions. That person doesn't have to say a single word. Their stillness alone becomes a threat. Jung called what happens next projection. Rather than sitting with the discomfort and asking the harder question, why does this person unsettle me? And what does that say about me? The mind finds a much simpler solution. It takes the uncomfortable feeling and places it onto the person who triggered it. Suddenly, you are no longer someone who sees clearly. You are arrogant. You are judgmental. You are cold. You are too much. You are intimidating. None of those accusations are really about you. They are the shadow looking for somewhere to land. Modern neuroscience confirms this pattern. When the brain perceives a social threat, the amygdala fires, the same ancient part of the brain that once protected us from predators. A 2012 study from the University of Virginia found that people consistently rate self-aware individuals as more threatening in group settings, not more dangerous, not more aggressive, just more threatening. Simply because another person's awareness activates our own unexamined fears about ourselves. The Stoics understood this long before neuroscience existed. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals that the clearest sign of an undeveloped mind is hostility toward those who simply choose to live differently. He wasn't talking about enemies on a battlefield. He was talking about people in your own circle, friends, colleagues, family. Buddhist teachings go even further. The Dhammapada, one of the oldest surviving collections of Buddhist teachings, says that the one who has begun to conquer themselves will always disturb those who have not yet started. Not because the more aware person intends any harm, but because their very existence asks a question the unprepared mind is not ready to answer. Why not me? Why not yet? Why am I still here? And when a question is too painful to face honestly, the mind does not sit with the discomfort. It attacks the mirror. So the next time someone pulls away from you without explanation, The next time a room shifts the moment you enter. The next time someone who once called you a friend starts treating you like a quiet inconvenience. Remember this: they are not responding to who you are. They are responding to what your presence asks them to feel, and that is never your burden to carry. There are 7 precise ways this dynamic shows up in everyday life. 7 silent triggers most people never recognize until the pattern has already become impossible to ignore. These triggers don't arrive with a warning. They appear in small, ordinary moments until the pattern is unmistakable. The first trigger: you reflect what they have been avoiding. Picture someone who has been meaning to get healthier, meaning to sort out their finances, meaning to work on their emotional reactions for years. Life stays busy, distractions stay easy. Then their closest friend quietly starts changing, not loudly, not with announcements, just living differently, waking earlier, saying no to things that drain them, getting their money and their mind right. Something subtle shifts in the friendship. The jokes get a little sharper. The comments get more dismissive. You've changed. You're so serious now. Look at you, too good for the old ways. None of it is direct. All of it has plausible deniability. But the pattern is clear. Your growth has become a mirror. The discipline reflects their avoidance. The consistency reflects their excuses. That mirror was never placed there on purpose, but it is there. And some people simply cannot tolerate what they see in it. So the discomfort gets shifted onto you. The second trigger: you represent what they quietly gave up on. Resentment almost never runs downward. People rarely resent those who are struggling more than they are. Resentment runs upward, toward the person who represents something the resentful person knows, on some quiet, honest level, they could have done or become. The colleague who actually finishes what he starts. The friend who finally left the relationship that was slowly destroying her. The cousin who went back to school at 34 while everyone else said it was too late. These people aren't attacking anyone. They aren't bragging. They aren't even thinking about you most of the time. But their existence quietly indicts the choices everyone around them made. And the easiest way to make that discomfort stop is to write them off. They got lucky. They think they're better than us. They changed. I don't even know them anymore. Devaluing you is cheaper than examining themselves. The third trigger: you stopped needing their approval. This one is the most misunderstood. Most social relationships are held together partly by invisible dependency. One person needs validation. Another needs to feel needed. Someone provides the emotional labor. Someone else provides the status. The system stays balanced as long as everyone plays their assigned role. Then something changes. You stop chasing the validation. You stop over-explaining yourself. You stop calibrating every word based on how someone might react. From your perspective, this is growth. From their perspective, it can feel like rejection. Because what you have actually done, without even intending to, is remove them from a position of quiet influence they may not have fully realized they were holding. They can't say that out loud. So the mind reframes it. You've become distant. You think you're better than everyone? You're not the same person anymore. What they are actually describing is the moment they lost a form of control over you. Admitting that is far harder than calling you arrogant. The fourth trigger: they can no longer predict you. Everyday social manipulation, the quiet, mostly unconscious kind that happens in offices, family dinners, and friend groups, runs on one simple mechanism: predictable reactions. If I guilt you, you apologize. If I criticize you, you try harder. If I go cold, you chase. If I give you just enough warmth, you soften. Think of the relative who makes the passive-aggressive comment at the holiday table, and everyone waits for your familiar reaction. The defensiveness, the over-explaining, the uncomfortable laugh. That reaction is the script. Everyone knows their lines. But what happens when you simply don't react? Not aggressively, not coldly. You just don't take the bait. The script breaks. Your stillness isn't hostile. Your calm isn't arrogant. But for someone who has been running that playbook for years, your non-reaction is deeply unsettling. It means one thing: you saw the game. And people who depend on not being seen playing it will never be fully comfortable around someone who is quietly watching the whole thing. The fifth trigger. You refuse to maintain the comfortable fiction. Every social group operates on unspoken agreements. We don't talk about certain things. We pretend certain behaviors are normal. We collectively agree to look the other way on dynamics that, if named out loud, would create chaos. The family that never discusses the alcoholism. The friend group that laughs along with the person who quietly humiliates others. The workplace where everyone knows the manager takes credit for other people's work, but nobody says a word. These agreements aren't always malicious. Often they are simply the path of least resistance, the social glue that keeps things from blowing up. But they are still fictions, and maintaining them requires everyone's participation. When you stop participating, when you don't laugh at the thing that isn't funny, when you quietly disagree instead of nodding along, when you name the dynamic everyone is pretending not to notice, you become a problem. Not because you attacked anyone, but because you broke the agreement. And groups protect their agreements aggressively, often without even realizing they are doing it. The sixth trigger. You started saying no. For a long time, you may have been easy. Easy to lean on, easy to access, easy to take for granted. You said yes when you meant no. You absorbed things you shouldn't have absorbed. You made yourself available to people who were rarely available to you in return. People appreciated this, though not always consciously. What they actually experienced was comfort. The comfort of knowing there was someone in their life with soft enough boundaries that they could behave however they wanted without real consequence. Then something changed in you. You started drawing lines. You pulled back from arrangements that were costing you more than they were worth. You said no, and meant it. The people who had grown comfortable with your lack of limits felt something they couldn't quite name. They didn't say, "I liked it better when I could walk all over you." They said, "You've changed. You're selfish now. You're not who you used to be." What they were really describing was the end of a deal they never had to negotiate, because you never asked for one. The seventh trigger. You are moving forward, and the gap is showing. This one is often the hardest because it touches people you genuinely love. When you change, really change, not just superficially, but in how you see the world, what you are willing to accept, and what you are building toward. You create distance from people who are standing still, not because you decided you were better, not because you left anyone behind on purpose, simply because you are now in a different place than you were. The people who haven't moved feel that gap. And the question the gap asks, silently and relentlessly, is, why not me? That question is unbearable for someone who isn't ready to answer it honestly. So the mind deflects. It turns the question into a judgment, and then turns the judgment outward onto you. You may be sitting with all of this and feeling something heavy. Recognition, maybe even grief for relationships you thought were solid, for rooms you once felt safe in, for people you loved who slowly became strangers without either of you fully understanding why. But ancient wisdom knew about this pattern long before Carl Jung was born and long before neuroscience had a name for it. The Vedic texts of ancient India spoke of ahamkara, roughly translated as the I maker, the part of the human mind that constructs an identity and then spends every waking moment defending it. The sages warned that ahamkara is the source of almost all human conflict, not because people are evil, but because the moment someone's constructed identity feels threatened, the mind goes to war, quietly, socially, sometimes with a smile still on its face. Buddhism takes it further with the concept of upadana, attachment, but not just to things, attachment to self-image. The Buddha taught that one of the deepest forms of suffering comes from the terror of losing the story we tell about who we are. When you grow more aware, more honest, more yourself, you threaten other people's grip on their own story. A mind that is gripping tightly to a story it cannot afford to question will push away the person who makes that story feel unstable. The Stoics observed the same pattern from a different angle. Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the most respected philosophers in history, wrote that if someone can show him that what he thinks or does is not right, he will happily change. But if they cannot, then what is asked of him is simply to remain as he is. Most people cannot show you where you are wrong because you haven't done anything wrong. What they are reacting to is their own reflection, and no amount of you shrinking will make that reflection disappear. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancients already knew. Social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. When someone's sense of identity feels threatened by your presence, their brain isn't just processing discomfort. It is processing something closer to pain. A brain in that state does not pause to ask whether the threat is real or accurate. It reacts, it deflects, it projects, it attacks. There is also cognitive dissonance, the discomfort the brain feels when two conflicting beliefs exist at the same time. Belief 1, I am a good person, living a meaningful life. Belief 2, that person next to me is living with more honesty, more purpose, or more courage than I currently am. Those two beliefs cannot comfortably coexist. So, the brain resolves the tension the fastest way it knows how. It discredits the second belief. That person is arrogant. They got lucky. They think they're special, identity protected, shadow untouched. The Sufi mystics called this the prison of the nafs, the lower self, the ego self, that is more concerned with appearing whole than with actually becoming whole. Rumi wrote that the human being who has not yet faced their own darkness will always fear the light in someone else. Not because the light is harmful, but because light casts shadows, and some people are not yet ready to see theirs. What all of these traditions agree on is this: the hostility you experience from people who should be in your corner is not a reflection of your worth. It is a reflection of a war happening entirely inside them. A war, your presence simply made harder to ignore. Jung called the path through this individuation the slow, difficult, often painful process of becoming wholly and completely yourself. Not independence, not isolation, not becoming better than everyone around you. Individuation. Most people never start this journey, not because they are lazy or broken, but because the world taught them from the beginning that fitting in is safer than being real. From childhood, you were handed scripts. Be this way at school, behave this way at family gatherings, want these things, fear these things, become this acceptable version of an adult. Somewhere along the way, the real you, the curious one, the honest one, the one with inconvenient questions and unexplainable longings, got quietly filed away into the shadow. Individuation is the process of going back for what was filed away. Not to become chaotic or destructive, but to integrate, to bring the hidden parts of yourself back into the light where they can be understood instead of suppressed. Jung believed this was not optional. A person who never individuates never truly lives. They perform life. They manage life. They survive life. But they never actually live it. When you begin to individuate, even slightly and even unconsciously, something changes in the energy you carry. You stop performing as often. You stop shrinking on command. You stop laughing at things that aren't funny and agreeing with things you don't believe. The people around you, who have never begun their own process, who are still fully identified with the mask they built, feel something shift, something they cannot name, something that makes them uneasy in your presence. Because an individuating person is harder to control, harder to predict, and harder to manage. In a world built on quiet social management, that is quietly revolutionary. So what do you actually do when you recognize this pattern happening around you? The most common mistake is trying to fix it by shrinking, performing more of the expected roles, sanding off the edges that make certain people uncomfortable. We are deeply wired for belonging. The feeling of being slowly pushed out of a group you cared about is real pain. But when you make yourself smaller to keep others comfortable, the resentment doesn't disappear. It just becomes more familiar. Because the thing that triggered it was never really your behavior. It was your potential, your honesty, your refusal to stay stuck. No amount of shrinking makes a mirror disappear. Instead, do these things. First, let some relationships evolve naturally. Not every connection that made sense at one version of you will make sense at another. The friend who loved you when you were lost may not know what to do with you now that you are finding yourself. That is not always failure or betrayal. Sometimes it is simply honesty. Grieving it is allowed and healthy. Holding yourself back to preserve a connection that no longer fits is a different kind of loss, entirely. Second, stop interpreting every negative reaction as personal feedback. There is a clear difference between someone who pulls you aside with genuine care and someone who simply goes cold the moment you stop being convenient. The first deserves your attention. The second is information of a different kind. Learn to tell them apart and stop carrying both with the same weight. Third, look for the people who move toward you when you are honest. They exist. The same quality that makes you threatening to people who are hiding from themselves makes you deeply compelling to people who are trying to find themselves. Both reactions come from the same place. One is fear. The other is recognition. The relationships built on recognition, where someone sees the real you rather than the performed or convenient version, are the ones worth building toward. Fourth, and most important, do your own shadow work. The same patterns operating in the people around you, the projection, the quiet resentment, the hostility triggered by things that hit too close to home, exist in you too. Nobody escapes being human. It is easy to become skilled at recognizing projection in others while forgetting to check whether you are doing it yourself. The goal is not to become someone who sees through everyone while remaining perfectly transparent. That is just a new mask. The enlightened observer, which is its own shadow in disguise. The real goal is simpler and harder, the honest, ongoing, imperfect work of becoming more real, more integrated, more you. Here is the truth that stays buried under all the noise and social performance. The coldness you felt in that room was never about you. The distance that grew in friendships you treasured was never about you. The quiet hostility from people who should have celebrated you was never about you. It was always about the mirror. A person who is becoming more honest, more aware, and more themselves becomes something the world is often unprepared for. A clear surface. When people look at a clear surface, they don't primarily see you. They see themselves, their unlived dreams, their buried potential, their unasked questions, their unchosen paths. For some people, that reflection is simply too much to bear. So they don't attack the reflection, they attack the mirror. Jung spent the final decades of his life trying to help people understand that this is not a tragedy. It is a signal. Every cold shoulder, every unexplained distance, every room that shifts when you enter is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is often evidence that something real is happening in you. Something most people in the comfortable noise of modern life never allow themselves to experience. Actual growth. Uncomfortable. Irreversible. The ancient texts say the lotus grows only in muddy water, not in clean, comfortable water, in the mud. The resistance you feel from the world around you as you begin to bloom is the mud. It is not proof that you should stop. It is proof that you have started. Over time, something quietly shifts. Some people drift away. A few disappear entirely. Yes, it hurts, especially the ones you genuinely loved, especially the ones you thought would stay. But something else happens too. The relationships that survive and the new ones that begin to form feel fundamentally different. They are not built on convenience or mutual performance or the shared agreement to never challenge each other. They are built on actual recognition. One real person seeing another real person and deciding that is worth something. And the exhaustion, that specific relentless drain of maintaining performances, pretending to agree, managing perceptions, playing roles for people who wouldn't recognize the real you anyway, slowly begins to lift. In the quiet that follows, you realize how much of your energy was never really yours, how much of your life was being spent keeping everyone else comfortable at the cost of being honest. Jung didn't write about shadow work because it is pleasant. He wrote about it because he believed it was the most important work a human being can do. Not impressive work, not admirable work, necessary work. The work of learning to see clearly enough to know the difference between a relationship ending because you are moving forward and a relationship ending because you did something wrong. That distinction matters more than almost anything else. Most of what looks like rejection, the cold shoulder, the the quiet exclusion, the faint hostility you can feel but never quite name, isn't really about you at all. It is about the people experiencing it and the parts of themselves your presence asks them to look at. You cannot change that. You cannot perform your way out of being a mirror. What you can do is stop flinching every time someone doesn't like what they see in it. The shadow is real. The persona is real. The quiet war happening inside every person you have ever met is real. And so is the path through it. They won't show you this, because showing you this means admitting that the most dangerous thing you can do in a world built on comfortable sleep is simply wake up. And once you do, you will never be able to go fully back to sleep. The only question left is a quiet one. Are you ready to stop looking away?